The school principal humiliates janitor, but discovers he saved his son. Dr. Richard Thompson felt his blood boil when he saw the stains on the trophy room floor. After 15 years as principal of Lincoln Public School in Denver, he had never tolerated carelessness, especially not on the eve of the school inspection. "Mr. Walter," he shouted down the hallway, his authoritative voice echoing through the school. The gray-haired man appeared at the end of the corridor, carrying his bucket and mop. At 62, Walter Jenkins walked with slow but steady steps, his calloused hands gripping the cleaning tools firmly. He wore the same gray uniform he had donned for nearly 2 decades at that school. "Yes, Dr. Richard." "What is this?" Richard pointed at the stains on the floor. "I specifically told you to use the neutral cleaner in the trophy room. These stains will show up in tomorrow's inspection." Walter looked at the floor and sighed softly. He knew every inch of that school like the back of his hand, but lately he had been forgetting small details. Age was weighing on him, and the principal's constant pressure didn't help. "I apologize, Doctor. I'll clean it again right away." "No, it's too late now. You should have done it right the first time." Richard's voice rose even louder, drawing the attention of teachers and staff passing through the hallway. Teacher Emily Parker, newly arrived at the school, discreetly stopped near the administration office, pretending to organize papers while watching the scene unfold. "This is carelessness, Mr. Walter. A lack of attention. I'll have to deduct the cost of hiring a professional cleaning service from your paycheck." Walter's face tightened slightly, but he kept his head down. Emily felt a pang in her chest, seeing the public humiliation of the man who always greeted her kindly every morning. "Please, Dr. Richard, I can try a homemade solution I learned from my late wife. Maybe it'll work better than—" "Your wife wasn't a chemist, Mr. Walter. Stop making up solutions and do as you're told." A heavy silence filled the hallway. Walter gripped the mop handle tighter, his hands trembling slightly, not from anger or fear, but from a deep sadness that Emily could sense even from a distance. "You may go, and next time, read the product instructions before using them." Richard turned abruptly and walked back to his office, leaving Walter alone in the hallway. The janitor took a deep breath and returned to work as if nothing had happened, but Emily noticed him discreetly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand before bending down to clean the floor again. During morning recess, Emily overheard students talking in the courtyard. "Mr. Walter is such a good guy," said Ashley, a 9th grader. "Yesterday he helped me when I dropped my books on the stairs." "Yeah," agreed Josh, her classmate. "He always asks how we're doing if we need anything. The principal doesn't even know our names." "My mum said he's worked here since before I was born," added Madison. "He knows everyone's family in the Riverside neighborhood." Emily approached the group, curious to learn more about the man she had just seen publicly humiliated. "Do you all know Mr. Walter well?" "Of course, teacher," Ashley replied enthusiastically. "He's like the grandpa of the school. Always has something nice to say to us." "And he never complains when we make a mess," Josh said. "Just asks us to be careful so we don't get hurt." "Pretty different from the principal, huh?" Madison whispered, glancing around to make sure Richard wasn't nearby. Emily sensed there was more to the story than she realized. She decided to seek out Mrs. Margaret, the school secretary, who had worked there longer than anyone. In the office, Margaret was organizing stacks of old documents when Emily approached her. "Mrs. Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. What do you need?" "It's about Mr. Walter. How long has he been working here?" Margaret stopped sorting the papers and looked straight at Emily. 18 years. He started a little after I did. Why do you ask?" "I saw something unpleasant this morning. The principal was very harsh with him over some stains on the floor." Margaret sighed and shook her head. "Dr. Richard is just like that. Very demanding. But Mr. Walter never complains about anything." "Does he have family?" "He did. His wife passed away about 5 years ago, pneumonia. They never had children. Now he lives alone in a little house near City Park Lake." Emily felt a pang in her heart. She imagined the man coming home every night to an empty house after a full day of being treated without respect. "Mrs. Margaret, can I take a look at the old archives? I'm working on a project about the school's history." "Of course. They're in that cabinet over there. Just be careful not to mess them up. It's already hard enough to keep everything organized. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Emily spent her free afternoon digging through the old archives. She found photos from the school's opening, minutes from past meetings, and employee hiring documents. That's when she stumbled upon something that left her puzzled. Inside a dusty folder was a copy of a resume. The name at the top made her stop breathing, Walter George Jenkins. But this wasn't the resume of a janitor. It was for a trained educator with a degree from the University of Michigan, specializing in special education and a master's in educational psychology. Emily read and reread the document, unable to believe her eyes. The dates showed that Walter had worked as an academic coordinator at several private schools in Denver before ending up here. He had training courses, conference participation, and articles published in educational journals. How had a man with this background ended up as a janitor? She discreetly made a copy of the resume and decided she needed to understand this story better. But she'd have to be tactful. If Walter hadn't shared his past, he must have had his reasons. Meanwhile, at home, Richard was dealing with his own problems. His 16-year-old son, Ethan, had come home late from school yet again. The boy locked himself in his room and barely spoke to his father during dinner. "Ethan, we need to talk." Richard knocked on the bedroom door. "I'm studying, Dad. Open this door now." Ethan opened the door with a sullen look. Tall and thin, he had his father's dark hair, but his eyes carried a sadness Richard couldn't understand. "What is it?" "Your mother called. She said you came home late yesterday, too. Where have you been after school?" "Out." "Out where?" "You're 16, Ethan. I need to know where you are. You never cared before." The words cut Richard like a blade. It was true. Ever since his wife had moved to Chicago for work 2 years ago, father and son barely spoke. Richard buried himself in work, and Ethan, well, Richard didn't even know what Ethan did in his free time. "Of course I care. You're my son." "Am I?" Ethan stared at him with unsettling maturity. "Because sometimes it feels like I'm just another problem for you to fix, like the ones at school." Richard felt a tightness in his chest but didn't know how to respond. Ethan closed the door again, leaving his father alone in the hallway. The next morning, the school inspection went much better than Richard had expected. The supervisor praised the organization of the documentation and the school's overall cleanliness. When he passed by the trophy room, he didn't even mention the stains on the floor, which Walter had managed to completely remove overnight. Richard felt relieved, but didn't bother to seek Walter out to acknowledge the extra work. In fact, he barely noticed the janitor all day. Ethan, on the other hand, had skipped his first class without his father knowing. He was sitting alone in the schoolyard during recess when Walter approached him. "Everything okay, Ethan?" The boy looked up, surprised. It was rare for anyone to ask how he was doing. "Hi, Mr. Walter. Everything's fine." Walter noticed the sadness on the boy's face. After nearly 2 decades working at the school, he'd developed a sharp instinct for spotting when a young person was struggling. "Mind if I sit here?" Ethan shrugged, and Walter took a seat on the bench beside him. "You know, when I was your age, I felt lost sometimes too. Do you know my dad?" "I've known Dr. Richard for a long time. He's a man dedicated to his work." "Dedicated to his work," Ethan repeated bitterly. "That's a nice way of saying he doesn't have time for anything else." Walter stayed silent for a few seconds, watching the other students playing in the yard. "Did you know I was married for over 30 years? Ethan looked at him curiously. "My wife, Mrs. Elizabeth, always told me one thing. Walter, sometimes people hide in their work when they don't know how to handle their feelings." "What does that mean?" "That maybe your father doesn't know how to show he cares about you. Some fathers are like that. They think working hard to provide for their family is enough to show love." Ethan considered those words. He'd never thought of it that way. "But how will I know if he really cares if he never talks to me? You could try talking first. Sometimes adults are afraid of sounding silly or saying the wrong thing." What if he tells me to shut up? Walter smiled gently. Then at least you'll know you tried. And who knows? Maybe he'll be surprised. Sometimes people just need a little push. The bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Ethan stood up to return to class. Thanks, Mr. Walter. Anytime you need to talk, I'm around. But Richard, who had stepped out of his office to get coffee in the teacher's lounge, saw his son talking to the janitor from a distance. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but it bothered him. Why was Ethan chatting with a staff member instead of being in class? At lunchtime, Richard called Ethan over to talk. I saw you talking to the janitor earlier during recess. And? I don't think it's appropriate for you to be chatting with school employees. Why not? Because they have work to do, and you have classes to attend. Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. Mr. Walter was kind to me, something you haven't been in a long time. Excuse me? Nothing, Dad. Forget it. No, I want to know. What did you mean by that? That maybe if you talked to me instead of just giving orders, we'd get along better. Richard fell silent, unsure how to respond. Ethan got up from the table and went to his room. That afternoon, Emily decided to stay a little longer at school to grade papers. When everyone else had left, she saw Walter organizing cleaning supplies in the storage room. It was the perfect opportunity for a conversation. Mr. Walter, can I talk to you? Of course, Teacher Emily, what do you need? Actually, I wanted to know a little more about your story here at the school. Walter stopped organizing the supplies and looked at her curiously. My story? Not much to tell. I work, go home, sleep, wake up, and work again. But you must have some interesting stories. You've seen so many students grow up. Oh, that's true. I've seen children who started here in preschool and left after 9th grade. Some even come back to visit when they're grown. Emily hesitated for a moment, then decided to be direct. Mr. Walter, can I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. Have you always been a janitor? The question caught Walter off guard. He stopped what he was doing entirely and stared at Emily. Why do you ask? Just curious, you seem, how can I put it, too educated to be a janitor. Walter finished with a sad smile. I didn't mean to offend. You didn't. It's a fair question. Walter sat on an old chair in the storage room and gestured for Emily to sit too. Let me tell you a story, Teacher Emily, but I need this to stay between us. Of course. I was an educator for almost 20 years. Coordinator, principal, I even taught at the university. Emily pretended to be surprised, though she already knew from his resume. Really? Really? I worked at private schools here in Denver, made good money, had a comfortable life with my wife. What happened? Walter took a deep breath before continuing. My Elizabeth got sick. Cancer. The health insurance didn't cover all the treatments she needed. I started spending our savings, sold the car, then the house. Emily felt her eyes well up. When the money ran out, I took out loans, then mortgaged our last property. I did everything to save my Elizabeth. And did you? For a while. She lived 5 years longer than the doctors predicted. They were the hardest and most precious 5 years of my life. But your job? I had to leave formal education. The medical bills kept coming, and I needed a job that gave me flexibility to care for her. Being a janitor let me adjust my schedule as needed. And after she passed, I'd already grown used to simplicity. I realized I didn't need much to be happy. A small house, honest work, the chance to be around children and young people. Emily was too moved to speak. Teacher Emily, can I ask you a favor? Of course. Don't tell anyone about this, especially not Dr. Richard. He already sees me as beneath him. If he knew I was an educator, he'd be even more uncomfortable around me. But why? Because then he'd know I understand the things he does wrong. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, continuing, Emily promised to keep his secret, but left the school with a heavy heart. How could someone sacrifice so much for love? And how could Richard treat so poorly a man who had given everything for the person he loved? In the days that followed, Emily paid closer attention to the dynamic between Richard and Walter. It was painful to see how the principal treated the janitor as if he were invisible, barking orders and never thanking him for his work. She also noticed Ethan kept talking to Walter during breaks. The boy seemed livelier after these conversations, but Richard didn't notice the change in his son's behavior. One afternoon, Richard left school early to handle administrative matters downtown. Ethan took the chance to have a longer talk with Walter. "Mr. Walter, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Ethan. How did you stay married for so long?" Walter smiled, understanding what lay behind the question. "Are your parents splitting up?" "They already did. My mum lives in Chicago now," said she needed time to think. "And how do you feel about that?" "Confused. Sometimes I think it's my fault." "Why would it be your fault?" "I don't know. Maybe if I'd been a better son, they'd have stayed together." Walter stopped sweeping and moved closer to the boy. "Ethan, can I tell you a secret?" "Go ahead." "Marriage is grown-up business. A child is never responsible for their parents' problems." "But..." "No buts. Your parents loved each other very much to bring you into this world. If they're having trouble staying together now, that doesn't lessen their love for you. My dad doesn't even seem to like me. Your dad is hurting too, Ethan. Sometimes adults get so lost in their own feelings, they forget to tend to their children's. What should I do?" "Try talking to him honestly. Tell him how you feel." "What if he doesn't want to listen?" "Then you wait a bit and try again. Sometimes people need more than one chance to hear what's important." Ethan absorbed these words like a revelation. "Mr. Walter, can I ask you something else?" "As much as you want." "Why are you so patient with everyone, even with my dad, who's sometimes kind of harsh?" Walter thought for a moment before answering. "You know, Ethan, when you've been through a lot of pain in life, you learn that fighting only brings more pain. I'd rather try to understand why people act the way they do." "And my dad? Why does he act like that?" "Your dad is very afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of failing, afraid of not being a good principal, afraid of not being a good father, afraid of being alone. When people are very scared, they sometimes get angry to hide it." Ethan had never thought of his father that way. To him, Richard had always seemed too confident, never afraid of anything. "How do you know that?" "Because I used to be like that too. When my wife got sick, I was so afraid of losing her that sometimes I was harsh without meaning to be. Later, I learned fear doesn't help anyone. What helps is love and patience." This conversation stayed with Ethan deeply. That night, he decided to try following Walter's advice. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Richard was working on his computer in the living room when Ethan approached. "I'm busy right now, Ethan." "It's important." Something in his son's tone made Richard stop and look at him. "What is it?" "I want to tell you how I've been feeling." Richard closed the laptop, sensing the conversation would be serious. "I'm mad at you and Mom," Ethan began, straight to the point. Richard braced for an argument, but Ethan continued. "But I'm also sad and scared." "Scared of what?" "That you'll leave me too." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "I'd never leave you, Ethan." "But you kind of already have. We barely talk, you're always busy, and when you do talk to me, it's just to complain about something." Richard's chest tightened. It was true, and he knew it. I don't know how to be a good dad, Ethan." The admission surprised them both. Richard had never been so honest about his insecurities. "You don't have to be perfect, Dad. You just have to really be here." "What do you mean?" "When you come home, you're on your computer or watching TV. When we eat dinner, you're on your phone. It's like I don't even exist." Richard realized his son was right. Since the separation, he'd buried himself in work and distractions to avoid facing his own pain. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't realize I was doing that. I just wish you'd ask me how my day was sometimes, or tell me about yours." "Can I start now?" Ethan smiled for the first time in weeks. "How was your day, Dad?" Richard smiled back. "Hard, I had a meeting with the Board of Education, and they're demanding improvements we don't have the budget for. How about yours? I had math class, which I hate, but I talked to Mr. Walter at recess, and he gave me some good advice. The mention of the janitor made Richard remember his discomfort with those conversations. What kind of advice? About how to talk to you. He was the one who encouraged me to come talk to you today. Richard was surprised. He didn't expect the janitor to have a positive influence on his son. Really? Really? He said you must be hurting from the separation too, and that sometimes adults don't know how to show their feelings. Richard felt a mix of gratitude and discomfort. He was thankful for the advice given to his son, but uneasy about having his emotions analyzed by an employee. He said that? He did. And he also said you're afraid. Afraid of what? Of not being a good father. Richard fell silent for a long time. How could that man see things he barely admitted to himself? In the following days, Richard began observing Walter more closely. He noticed how the janitor interacted with the students always kindly, how he knew every child's name, how comfortable they seemed talking to him. He also noticed Ethan was happier and more talkative at home. The boy had started sharing about his day at school, asking questions about his father's work, even suggesting weekend activities they could do together. But instead of feeling grateful to Walter for this positive change, Richard felt threatened. Why could his own son open up to a stranger, but not to him? Why did a janitor's words carry more weight than a father's? Richard's discomfort grew when he started noticing other details about Walter. How the man spoke knowledgeably about educational topics when other staff asked his opinion. How he always knew exactly which cleaning supplies to use for each task, showing unusual technical knowledge for someone without formal training. One afternoon, Richard decided to test Walter. "Mr. Walter, I need you to organize the new library. The books arrived all mixed up." "How would you like me to organize them, Doctor?" "Use whatever system you think is best." Richard expected Walter to ask for help or seem confused. Instead, the janitor went to the library and began sorting the books with impressive efficiency. First by age group, then by subject, and finally alphabetically within each category. When Richard checked the results at the end of the day, he was stunned. The organization was flawless, following educational standards many teachers didn't even know. "How did you know how to organize them like this?" "My late wife was a teacher, Doctor. I learned a few things from her." Walter's answer was convincing, but Richard had a nagging feeling there was more to it. He decided to investigate. The next day, he asked Margaret to check Walter's employee file. "Mrs. Margaret, I need to see Mr. Walter's hiring records." "Is there a problem, Doctor?" "No, just routine verification." Margaret brought the file, but Richard noticed she seemed nervous. "Everything's here, Doctor." Richard examined the documents. He found certificates, proof of residence, references from previous jobs as a janitor and cleaner, nothing suggesting higher education. But something didn't add up. The references were all from short-term jobs, and there was a nearly 5-year gap in his work history before Walter arrived at the school. "Mrs. Margaret, do you know more details about Mr. Walter's past?" "Not much, Doctor. He's always been private." "And this gap here? 5 years without work?" "I think that's when he cared for his sick wife." The information matched what Ethan had mentioned about Walter saying he'd been married, but Richard remained suspicious. That night at home, Richard decided to probe his son. "Ethan, what exactly does Mr. Walter talk to you about during your conversations?" "Life stuff." "Why do you want to know?" "Just curious. Does he talk about his past?" "Sometimes. He tells stories about when he was married." "Why are you asking this, Dad?" Richard realized he was being too direct. "Nothing specific. It's just that he seems very intelligent for a janitor." "Dad," Ethan looked seriously at Richard, "you're talking as if being a janitor was a job for dumb people." His son's observation made him stop and think. That was exactly what he was implying. "That's not it, Ethan." "Then what?" "Mr. Walter is an amazing person. He knows about everything, always has good advice, treats everyone well. If everyone were like him, the world would be a much better place." Richard felt uneasy about his son's admiration for Walter. It felt like he was losing his place in Ethan's life to a man he barely knew. The following week, Richard began putting more pressure on Walter, unconsciously looking for flaws in the janitor's work. "Mr. Walter, this window isn't clean enough. The second-floor bathroom needs a deeper cleaning. The supplies are organized wrong in the storage room." Walter took all the criticism silently, redoing the work without complaint and maintaining the same respectful attitude. This irritated Richard even more. Emily, observing the situation, decided to step in subtly. "Dr. Richard, may I speak with you about Mr. Walter?" "What about him?" "I've noticed you've been very demanding with him lately. He's an employee like any other. He has to do his job right. But he's always done his job right. In fact, he does it better than any janitor I've ever seen." "How so?" "He anticipates problems, suggests improvements, knows every detail of the school. It's like he genuinely cares about education, not just cleaning." Richard fell silent, processing Emily's words. "Teacher Emily, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think he has more education than he lets on?" Emily hesitated between keeping the secret she'd promised Walter and helping Richard understand the situation. "Why do you think that?" "A hunch. He speaks, acts, and solves problems like someone with experience in education." "And if he did, would that be a problem?" The question caught Richard off guard. It wouldn't be a problem, but it would be strange. Why would someone with education work as a janitor? Maybe because he needed to, or because he wanted to. Not everyone measures success by their job title. Richard left the conversation even more intrigued. He decided he needed to uncover the truth about Walter. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That afternoon, Richard waited until everyone had left and went to look for Walter in the storage room. "Mr. Walter, may I speak with you?" "Of course, Doctor. I'd like to understand your professional background better." Walter stopped organizing the supplies and looked directly at Richard. "My professional background? Yes. I've noticed you have knowledge beyond what's expected for your position." "What kind of knowledge?" "Library organization, teaching criteria, student relations." "Where does that come from?" Walter took a deep breath. He knew this moment would come someday. "My wife was an educator, Doctor. I've been around the education field for many years." "Just from being around it?" "Mostly." Richard sensed Walter was being evasive. "Mr. Walter, may I be direct?" "Go ahead. I think you're hiding something about your past. Everyone has things from their past they'd rather not talk about, Doctor. But in your case, it seems relevant to your work here." "Relevant how?" "You influence my son. He listens to you more than he listens to me. I need to know who you really are." Walter felt a pang in his chest. He'd grown fond of Ethan and didn't want to cause problems between father and son. "Dr. Richard, may I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Are you worried about your son or about your ego?" The direct question left Richard speechless. "Excuse me?" "Ethan is a smart and sensitive boy. He just needs someone to listen to him without judgment. If I can do that and you can't, maybe the problem isn't who I am but how you relate to him." Richard felt anger rising in his chest. "You have no right to give me advice on how to raise my son." "You're right, I apologize. And I want you to stop talking to Ethan during breaks." "What?" "You heard me. You're a janitor, not a counselor. Stay in your lane." Walter fell silent for a long moment. "And if Ethan tries to talk to me, you politely say you have work to do and walk away." "Dr. Richard, no discussion, that's an order." Richard left the storage room with a sense of victory, but also a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew he was being unfair, but he couldn't handle the fact that an employee had more emotional access to his son than he did. The next day, Ethan sought out Walter during break like he always did. "Hi, Mr. Walter, how are you?" "Hi, Ethan, I'm good. And you?" "I want to tell you something. Last night, my dad and I talked for almost 2 hours. It was amazing." Walter smiled, genuinely happy at the news. "That's wonderful, son. It was all because of your advice. Thank you so much." "Don't mention it, Ethan. I'm glad it's working out." Ethan sat on the bench where they always talked, but Walter didn't join him. "Mr. Walter, aren't you going to sit?" "Actually, Ethan, I need to keep working." "Oh, okay, but can I just quickly tell you about my talk with my dad?" "Better not, son. I've got a lot to do today." Ethan looked confused. Walter had never refused to talk to him before. "Did something happen?" "No, nothing. It's just, well, you're getting along with your dad now. You don't need my advice anymore." "But I like talking to you. You're my friend." Walter's heart ached. "And I like you too, Ethan, but I think it's better if you focus on talking to your dad now." Ethan was hurt, but didn't push. He walked away with his head down, not understanding what had changed. In the days that followed, whenever Ethan tried to approach, Walter found an excuse to leave. The boy grew sad again, and Richard noticed the shift. "Ethan, you've been quieter lately. Is something wrong?" "No, Dad." "Are you sure? You can tell me anything." Ethan hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Mister, Walter is avoiding me." "What do you mean?" "We used to always talk during breaks. Now he says he has work and walks away." Richard feigned surprise. "That's strange. Why would he do that?" "I don't know. Maybe I did something wrong." "I'm sure it's nothing you did." Richard felt guilty seeing his son's sadness, but couldn't bring himself to admit he had forbidden the conversations. The situation grew even tenser when Ethan started skipping afternoon classes again. Richard only found out when he got a call from the school office. "Dr. Richard, we need to talk about Ethan." "What did he do?" "He's been missing afternoon classes. It's been 3 days in a row now." Richard grew worried. He thought things were fine between them after their recent talks. "Where is he going?" "No one knows. He leaves at lunch and doesn't come back." Richard hung up and went to look for Ethan at school. He found him sitting alone under a tree in the yard, looking lost. "Ethan, where have you been during afternoon classes?" "Around." "What do you mean around? I got a call from the office." "Sorry, Dad." "I don't want sorry. I want an explanation." Ethan looked at his father with teary eyes. "I've been going somewhere I can be alone to think." "Where?" "An old building near the Riverside neighborhood. Sometimes other kids are there too." Richard felt a chill. He knew the area and was aware it wasn't safe. "What boys?" "Some older kids. They don't go to school anymore." "Ethan, that's dangerous. Why are you doing this?" "Because I feel alone, Dad." "But we were talking, getting along." "We were. But when Mr. Walter stopped talking to me, I realized I don't have anyone else to talk to about the important things." Richard felt as if he'd been punched. "You can talk to me about anything." "Can I?" Ethan stared at him. "Can I tell you that sometimes I'm afraid to sleep because I dream about you and Mom fighting? Can I tell you that sometimes I blame myself for the divorce? Can I tell you I'm afraid you'll find another family and forget me?" Each word was like a stab to Richard's heart. "Of course you can tell me these things. But you don't know what to say, Dad. You get uncomfortable when I talk about my feelings." Mr. Walter knew what to say. He helped me understand things in a way that made sense. Richard realized he'd made a terrible mistake by pushing Walter away from Ethan. "Why do you think he stopped talking to you?" "I don't know. Maybe he realized I really am a troubled kid." "You're not troubled, Ethan. You're going through a tough time, which is different." Mr. Walter said the same thing once. Richard took a deep breath. He knew he had to fix this. "Ethan, can I tell you something?" "Sure." "I told Mr. Walter to stop talking to you." Ethan looked at him in shock. "What?" "I was jealous. Jealous that you trusted him more than me." "Dad, it was selfish of me." "And it was wrong." Ethan didn't know what to say. "I'll talk to him and ask him to be your friend again." "You'd do that?" "Of course. If it's good for you, it's good for me too." Ethan threw himself into his father's arms, relieved. "Thank you, Dad." Richard hugged his son, realizing how much he'd almost lost because of his own pride. That afternoon, after everyone had left, Richard went to find Walter in the storage room. "Mr. Walter, I need to apologize." Walter stopped what he was doing and looked at Richard. "Apologize for what, Doctor?" "For telling you not to talk to Ethan." You didn't do anything wrong. You have every right to decide who your son talks to. But it was wrong, and it hurt Ethan. Walter grew concerned. How so? He's been skipping school again, hanging around dangerous places because he feels alone. Dr. Richard, You were right when you said maybe the problem was how I relate to him, not who you are. Walter was surprised by Richard's humility. Ethan needs you, Mr. Walter, and I need to learn not to be jealous of that. Are you sure? I am. In fact, I want to ask for more than that. What? I want you to teach me how to talk better to my son. The request touched Walter deeply. Dr. Richard, I'm not in any position to teach you anything. Yes, you are. You have something I don't. Patience to listen without judging. That can be learned, Doctor. Then teach me. Walter sat in the old chair in the storage room and gestured for Richard to sit too. The first thing is to understand that teenagers don't want advice. They want to be heard. How so? When Ethan talks to me, I don't try to solve his problems. I just listen and ask questions so he can find the answers himself. But what if he's doing something wrong? Then you guide him without judging. Explain the risks and let him decide. A teenager who feels judged stops talking. Richard absorbed every word like a precious lesson. What else? Don't take things personally. When Ethan gets angry or upset, it's not about you, it's about the situation. If you react like it's a personal attack, it'll turn into a fight. That's hard. Yeah, but necessary. How did you learn that? By taking care of my wife when she was sick. Illness makes people irritable sometimes. I learned that when she took it out on me, it was the pain talking, not her. Richard felt a wave of respect for Walter. Can I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. Were you really always a janitor? Walter looked Richard straight in the eyes. No. I figured. What was your profession? Educator. I was an academic coordinator for almost 20 years. Richard fell silent, processing the information. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I thought you'd feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable how? Having a former educator working as a janitor in your school. You'd think I was analyzing your work or that I felt superior. And do you? No. Everyone chooses the path that makes sense for their life. Why did you choose to be a janitor? Walter told the whole story of his wife's illness, the financial sacrifices, and his decision to keep the simple job after losing Elizabeth. Richard listened quietly, feeling smaller and smaller in the face of that man's story of love and dedication. Mr. Walter, I need to apologize for much more than forbidding you from talking to Ethan. How so? For all the times I treated you as inferior, for all the public humiliations, for not recognizing your worth. Dr. Richard, let me finish. You sacrificed your career for love. You keep your dignity even when treated poorly. You take better care of my son than I do. And I treated you like you were nothing. Walter grew emotional. You were protecting your space. It's natural. It wasn't protection. It was arrogance and ignorance. Richard took a deep breath before continuing. Can I make a proposal? What proposal? I want you to take on an educational advisor role here at the school, officially. Dr. Richard, You have the education, the experience, and most importantly, the gift of talking to young people. The school needs that. But I like what I do. You can keep helping with cleaning if you want, but you could also use your training to help students like Ethan. Walter grew thoughtful. Can I think about it? Of course. But no matter your decision, I want you to know you have my respect and gratitude. Thank you, Dr. Richard. I'm the one who should thank you for taking care of my son when I didn't know how. The next day, Richard called Ethan to talk. I spoke with Mr. Walter yesterday, and I apologized for forbidding him from talking to you. Really? Really? And I asked him to teach me how to be a better father. Ethan smiled. What did he say? That the first rule is to listen without judging. He always says that. So I want to practice. Can you tell me about those places you've been going when you skip class? Ethan hesitated. You won't get mad? I'll try not to. I want to understand why you feel the need to go there. Ethan talked about the abandoned building, the older boys he met there, and how he felt accepted among them. They don't ask about my family, don't care if I'm a good student or if I have problems. They just let me be there. Richard wanted to forbid his son from going back there, but remembered Walter's advice. I see why that's appealing to you. Really? Really? You want a place where you can be yourself without pressure? Exactly. But I'm worried about the safety of the place. Why? Abandoned buildings can be dangerous. Unstable structure, broken glass, no emergency exits. Ethan hadn't thought about those things. And if any of those boys get into trouble, you could end up involved without meaning to. They're good people, Dad. They might be. But sometimes good people make bad decisions in a group. Ethan grew thoughtful. What do you suggest? How about we turn our home into a place where you feel accepted without judgment? How? You can bring your friends over. We can set up a space in the backyard just for you all, and I promise not to question everyone coming and going. Ethan liked the idea. What if some of my friends are kinda different? Different how? I don't know. Colored hair, ripped clothes, piercings? Richard laughed. Ethan, I'm 42 years old. I've seen it all. As long as they're respectful and don't use drugs in the house, they can be whoever they want. Really? Really? The only rule is honesty between us. Ethan agreed to the proposal, and for the first time in months, he felt genuinely excited. Over the next few days, the relationship between father and son improved dramatically. Richard applied Walter's advice about listening without judging, and Ethan felt more comfortable sharing his thoughts. Walter started talking to Ethan during breaks again, and the boy was overjoyed to find out it was his own father who had asked for it to happen. Mr. Walter, my dad told me you were a teacher. He did? He did, and he said you're going to become the school counselor. I'm still thinking about the offer. Why are you unsure? Because I like the simplicity of my life right now. But you could help so many students like you helped me. Maybe you're right. I know I am. There are a lot of kids here who need someone who really knows how to listen. The conversation with Ethan helped Walter make his decision. By the end of the week, he went to see Richard. Dr. Richard, I accept your offer. Really? Really, but with a few conditions. What are they? I want to keep doing the cleaning work too. It brings me joy to keep the school organized. No problem. And I want my new role to be voluntary. I won't accept a pay raise. Why? Because I want to do this out of passion, not for money. Richard felt even greater admiration for Walter. I accept your conditions. Can I make one last request? Of course. I'd like Teacher Emily to be my partner in educational counseling. Teacher Emily? She has the sensitivity to notice when students are struggling, and she's already shown genuine concern for their well-being. Richard agreed with the suggestion. The following Monday, Richard made an announcement to the whole school during recess. Attention everyone, I have some important news to share. The students gathered in the courtyard, curious. Starting this week, our school will have an educational counseling service. Some students applauded, and I'm pleased to announce that our counselors will be Teacher Emily Parker and Mr. Walter Jenkins. The courtyard erupted in cheers and applause. The students loved the news that Walter would have an official role to help them. Mr. Walter has a degree in education and years of experience. He'll continue taking care of our school's cleanliness because he loves what he does, but he'll also be available for conversations and guidance. Ethan stood beaming in the front row, clapping enthusiastically. From today on, any student who wants to talk about personal struggles, family issues, school problems, or anything else can reach out to Teacher Emily or Mr. Walter. After the announcement, Richard asked to speak with Walter privately. Mr. Walter, there's something I never told you. What? Thank you. Thank you for what? For saving my son. I didn't save anyone, Dr. Richard. Yes, you did. You saved Ethan from loneliness, from sadness, from the wrong path he was heading down. And you saved me too. How so? You saved me from losing my son because of my pride and ignorance. Walter was moved. "Dr. Richard, can I say something?" "Of course. You're a good father. I just needed a little guidance like any father. And you were my guide without me even realizing it." The two men embraced, sealing a friendship born of humility and mutual respect. In the following months, the school transformed. With Walter and Emily working as counselors, many students who had problems at home or emotional difficulties found support. Ethan became one of the most communicative students in the school, always willing to help classmates going through struggles similar to those he had faced. Richard completely changed his approach as principal. He began valuing every staff member, learning students' names, and creating a more human and welcoming environment at school. The relationship between father and son flourished. They made it a habit to talk every evening about their day, and Richard learned to listen without judging as Walter had taught him. One day, Richard received a call from his ex-wife. "Richard, I need to talk to you about Ethan." "Did he do something?" "Quite the opposite. He's unrecognizable. When I talk to him on the phone, I can tell he's much more mature, confident, and happy." "It's true." "What happened?" "I met someone who taught me how to be a better father." "Who?" "The school janitor." Richard told his ex-wife the whole story, from the early humiliations toward Walter to the transformation of their entire family. "I'm impressed," she said at the end. "You've changed so much, Richard. I'm still learning, but now I know that being a father isn't about authority. It's about connection. Ethan told me about this Walter of yours. He seems like a special person." "He is. He saved our family without us even realizing it." A few months later, the ex-wife came back from Chicago for a visit. She wanted to meet Walter in person. "Mr. Walter, I'm Ethan's mother. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for our family." "I didn't do anything extraordinary, ma'am." "Yes, you did. You gave my son back to his father, and you gave me back the man I married." "What do you mean?" "The Richard who talks to you and learns from you is the Richard I knew 20 years ago. Kind, humble, willing to grow." Walter was moved. "Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. That's exactly what you did. Thank you." At that year's 9th grade graduation ceremony, Ethan was chosen to give the farewell speech on behalf of his class. "Dear classmates, teachers, and families," Ethan began, visibly emotional. "During these years at Lincoln Public School, we've learned much more than school subjects. We've learned about life, about relationships, about how to be better people. I want to talk about someone who changed my life and the lives of many students here, Mr. Walter Jenkins." Walter, who was at the back of the auditorium, was surprised to hear his name. "Mr. Walter taught me that dignity isn't about the position you hold, but the character you have. He taught me that kindness is a choice we make every day. When I was lost and sad, he listened without judging me. When my father and I couldn't understand each other, he taught us how to really talk. But most importantly, he taught me that we all have value, no matter who we are or what we do." Ethan looked directly at Walter. "Thank you, Mr. Walter, for saving me when I needed it most. And thank you for saving my family." The entire auditorium rose in an emotional standing ovation. Walter had tears in his eyes, as did Richard and many others present. After the ceremony, as everyone mingled in the schoolyard, Richard approached Walter. "How does it feel to be honored like that in public?" "Embarrassed," Walter laughed. "I didn't do anything to deserve it." "Yes, you did. You saved an entire family with your patience and wisdom. Dr. Richard, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course. You all saved me too." "How so?" "After my Elizabeth passed, I was lost. I couldn't find meaning in life anymore. Working here, meeting Ethan, helping all of you, it gave me a new purpose." "Really? Really? Sometimes when we help others, we're helping ourselves too." Richard smiled. "So we were one family saving another." "Exactly." The two men looked at Ethan, who was chatting excitedly with classmates and teachers, radiating the confidence and joy he had regained. "Mr. Walter, can I ask one last question?" "As many as you'd like." "Do you regret anything?" "Leaving your career as an educator, accepting the job as a janitor." Walter thought for a moment. "I don't regret a thing. Every choice I made brought me here. And here is exactly where I'm meant to be. How can you be so sure? Because here, I found a new family. You, the students, the teachers. Not everyone gets the luck of finding family twice in life. Richard was moved by the answer. We're the lucky ones to have found you. As they spoke, Ethan approached. Dad, Mr. Walter, can I interrupt? Of course, they answered in unison. I just wanted to tell you both how happy I am. Why? Asked Richard. Because I finally have two fathers. Walter protested. I'm not your father, Ethan. Not on paper, but in my heart you are. And it's okay to have two dads. One who teaches me about responsibility and another who teaches me patience. The three embraced, forming a portrait of a family saved by the power of love, humility, and second chances. Years later, when Ethan was in college, he always returned to the school to visit Walter. Richard had become a respected and beloved principal by the entire school community. Walter still cleaned the school every morning, but spent his afternoons counseling students as an educational advisor. He had become a living legend at the school, known throughout the community as the man who transformed lives with patience and wisdom. Richard never yelled at another staff member again. He learned that true leadership comes from respect, not fear. And Ethan grew into a compassionate and mature young man, always ready to help those in need, carrying with him the lessons from both his father and the man who saved his family. Their story became legend at the school. New teachers always heard about the principal who learned humility from the janitor, the boy who found a father in the simplest man at the school, and the educator who chose simplicity without losing greatness. And at the end of each day, when the school stood empty and quiet, Walter walked the halls he knew like the back of his hand, knowing he had found his place in the world. It didn't matter if he was a janitor or an advisor, an employee or a counselor. What mattered was that he was loved, respected, and needed. He had discovered that dignity doesn't come from what you do, but how you do it. And that sometimes, to save someone, you first have to accept being saved. End of story. Now, tell us what you thought of this touching story and where you're watching from. Do you believe humility can transform relationships like it did for Richard and Walter? Share your honest thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like if the story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will move you.